Hello. Welcome to this month's YouTube Live and Facebook live stream, and we're streamed a few other places as well. So welcome to everyone who's here. And as always, you can ask a question in the chat and I will answer whatever is on your mind relating to autism. And we do have a theme this month, and it's when it's hard to hope. So this journey with autism is a roller coaster. There's ups and downs, and some days it's easier to hope than others. And you also want to make sure your hope is grounded, and that gives you more ability to grow that hope when it's grounded in, let's say, science, logic. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I will keep my eye on the comments. So if you have a question and it doesn't have to be related to hope, any type of autism question, just put it in the chat. If you see my eyes moving around, that is what I'm looking for. And without further ado, we can start talking about hope. And it's something that is certainly important to have. And many times it gets lost along the way. So I'm going to break it down into different stages. So I've been through many of these stages, so I can add my personal experience for sure, things that I wish I knew, things that I wish I did better, and no judgment on me, but if I can share anything that I've learned along the way, I most certainly will. So before the diagnosis, it's important to understand, what does despair sound like, right? Because if we don't know when we're in despair, then how can we ever really be in hope? So before the diagnosis, it's when you have that concern, that worry, something's not right. So it just is kind of like eating at you, gnawing at you. There's something in your gut that says, something's not going right. And maybe no one's believing you, right? This happened a lot many years ago. I think this is happening less now, when people don't believe you, just because the prevalence of autism has increased so much in the past decade. So in many ways, I think parents are believed more, but it is still scary, and it's still certainly a very lonely feeling. And it's definitely not what you were planning when you had a child. So the despair is, something's going on, no one's believing me, or I'm not getting the help that I need. And it is a scary and lonely feeling. So one thing to do is to start to anchor into your inner wisdom. And your intuition is fantastic. So that's one thing I always talk about with parents, when we're working together on the platform or in whatever form. It's always about, I trust the parent's intuition more than any particular doctor, right, who may have seen their child for 20 minutes, something like that. Your intuition tells you a lot, right? That was your intuition that told you something was going wrong. You had that feeling. So really validating your intuition is important, because that's really what's going to help guide you. And it's you doing the guiding. And it's that inner intelligence, which is really important. And so many times, like, okay, what do we do, right? All right, it's fine to say validate your own intuition, right? But how do you do that? How do you cultivate that as a skill? So one thing that is really beneficial is to start a journal. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could even be just on a scrap paper, or even in your calendar in your phone. So you start to keep a journal of what you observe, right? Because when you interact with any doctors, now you're taking that intuition, you're putting it into data collection, and then you can start having that more scientific conversation with doctors and people, so that they can take your intuition and really understand it and say, okay, wow, this person's intuition, they took data over 3 weeks. This is more than intuition. Right now you're backing it up with data. So keeping a journal of what you observe is important, because then your intuition has more weight to it. So hopefully you can certainly see that. You know, sometimes it's very easy for a doctor or someone to say, "Oh, you know, you're just making it up. It's not that bad. It doesn't happen that often. Oh, if it only happens every once in a while, no big deal, right?" But it might be a very big deal for you. When you have that data and when you also have patterns, that's when you can start to have really powerful information that goes along with your intuition. And you can use that journal to advocate for different things for your child. Because again, now you have data backing up your intuition. So it's also a good way to remind yourself that you're not crazy, right? So if you're tracking a certain behavior, you have the data for it. And if someone says you're crazy and they're talking about data, they're just not worth your time. So then you don't have to feel bad finding someone else. So you're certainly not crazy. You're tuned in. Your intuition is what brought you to make those observations. And then your analytical part is what is recording the data. And that's really what makes it powerful. So then, right, like how do you relate that into hope? When you see all that data, you might get despair, like, oh my goodness, this is really a problem, right? But now you've identified the problem, you've quantified it. Now it's all about resolving it. So you can start to shift out of that problem mode, that problem mindset. Oh, this is a problem, this is a problem. You have the problem. Now you can really focus on that solution using your intuition to guide you, but with data. So hopefully that helps balance that despair and hope. And how do you use intuition to have strength in what you advocate for your child, right? So scientifically, right, I think everyone knows I'm very much the scientist. I certainly believe in intuition. Oh, most definitely. So there's science that has been still like scientific publications showing that parents are often the first to detect early signs. So your intuition is being validated by scientific studies. So there is a lot to your intuition. It certainly gets dismissed very easily, but when you have that data to back it up, it really can't be dismissed by anyone who's credible. And then journaling, right? So journaling, and however you do it, whether it's a notebook or electronically or all of these different ways of doing it, it helps you recognize patterns so you can isolate what the issues are much easier and quicker. And it also helps with emotional processing if you wanted to journal on that as well. So it might be you're recording when your child doesn't sleep, right? So you're keeping the data, and that's like the scientific part. And then you might just want to extend that journaling to some emotional aspect, like, wow, today was really hard. Whew, right? And then you'll see the pattern whenever your child doesn't sleep. They have a bad day and you have a bad day. So hopefully then you have a little bit more grace to yourself. But that's how you take science, pair it with your intuition, and then hope grows. Oh, we have some comments. Let me switch over to comments. All right. Am I familiar? Here, I can put this up. And if anyone ever doesn't want me to show their comment, just put in the comments that don't show it. Okay, so this question, are you familiar with the work of Dr. Robert Melillo? Yes, I very much am. Apparently, he has had transformative results in helping people with autism. He certainly has, for sure. He does a lot of work with primitive reflexes. They were doing clinical trials up in Massachusetts. It was the protocol was with primitive reflexes and things like that, but it was really more on ADHD. So that is, I believe, more his documented success. He certainly has worked with kids with a variety of diagnosis. He has a business, so there's different sites, franchises people can purchase the rights, and then they have access to his curriculum. So it certainly is available throughout the US. So you don't necessarily have to go see him to explore some of his work. But that's really the background on Dr. Melillo. Did you see, was there a particular question you wanted me to answer about that? Okay, there's another comment. I love it when parents comment to each other. That's what makes this very rich and building a community. If you make it to page 131 of his book, yes, he has a book. He states a whole list of people his work doesn't help, which was my child. I do have, I'm sure I have his book somewhere. I don't have it on hand right now, so I can't reference page 131, but I guess that is what lists what it doesn't help. I would have to go and look at that list again. But and I have to say, that's the important aspect to autism. And that's what we were talking about, like with Hope, that first stage, identifying what the issue is, really getting clarity, real clarity on that, and then taking action towards it and not getting distracted by, oh, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. It's really having that focus of saying, okay, what are the top, on the platform we've always worked with, what are the top 3 issues? And what are the top 3 issues according to the parent? What is most problematic? And then focusing on those. So that is the flow. So Riri, I'm really glad you were able to read up to page 131 and then see, okay, this is not going to help my child, pivot, so that you can then focus on what will. Because there's so many things that help, but it's like there's just thousands of bits of information that could be helpful, but you really have to sort through it all. So when you come to something that is not beneficial, definitely don't get hung up on it. It just has provided you more clarity. Okay, let me just, okay. All right. So Dennis, if there's a specific question relating to Dr. Melillo or any of like primitive reflexes or something like that, certainly just put that in the chat. And Riri, if you have a particular question, I am certainly willing to answer. All right, let's go back. And I do get parents who ask me, or who even make appointments with me and realize that I work with parents. So we have developed the Navigating Autism platform, and we base it on parents and what do parents need? How can we help them in the most way? And we are constantly told how there is just too much information out there and you need to have a plan. And the nuance is you can't have just a linear XYZ plan, because that's not going to work for every child. This is where autism can seem complex, right? But if you have a particular framework that you can move through, that's where complexity gets reduced to clarity. And let me just, actually, before we get back, let me just post, if you're interested in exploring the platform, talking with me more about it, this is what I do. This is what my focus is giving quality scientific information, but giving the guidance so that you're not wasting too much time on something that's not relevant to your child. And that's the whole key. It's your child. And there's so many different combinations as to what the root causes could be that you've got to have strategy. Otherwise, you end up just turning your wheels. So I certainly welcome anyone who's interested in working with us on the platform to check out the link that I just posted, and we can have a conversation and figure out if it's the best fit for you. If not, then I will let you know what the best fit is. Okay, so I'll keep an eye on my comments, and let me get back to hope. Gotta have hope, for sure. Okay, so now let's say you're right at the diagnosis. Now, I remember that day. Oh goodness, I remember it. I have to say, but only when someone reminds me of it. It's not something that I carry with me daily now. So despair, and I definitely was in despair. Was like everything has just changed. I don't know what to do. I think I must have caused this. Like I was somehow not a good parent. I had a lot of guilt that way. Like, how could this have happened? And just definitely a lot of blame. So I don't think I would could even approach hope. Right? I didn't have hope for a while. I didn't have hope actually until I really started getting into the science and being like, okay, right. But that's what despair is. So you're gonna have despair more than likely on those days. Even though I knew the autism diagnosis was coming, it was not a surprise. Um, just everything changed, right? So I will say, taking a pause and gathering yourself before like just jumping into all the research and taking action, right? If you take action too soon, then it's too chaotic. It's too much from a place of panic, right? And it's not from a place of intuition. Your intuition might have gotten you here and like, no, there's something wrong. I tracked the data. You got in front of a good doctor, got a diagnosis, right? So it's gonna be hard because you have that like clock ticking, tick, 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 right? Where it's like, oh, I gotta do something. I gotta do something. If I'm not doing something, then I'm definitely being a bad parent. Like that whole kind of pressure. Um, but when you take action from that frantic space, it typically doesn't go well. So just pausing and just getting your footing again, and then going into research mode before taking action mode is definitely something that will get you further because you'll be able to formulate a plan. And that's really what you want to do. Now, right, this is all that's going on in your head. Don't forget, you have your child who is looking at you, who is watching you, even if you don't think they are, even if they're not making eye contact, right? Like I have worked with so many parents whose children have either come off the spectrum or changed significantly, where at that point, their child communicates how much they have been learning and aware of everything all along. And it's stunning, absolutely stunning. So please don't think that just because your child is not talking or is maybe not looking at you or maybe has some bad behaviors, right? Bad in quotes, bad behaviors, that they're not being able to comprehend everything. They definitely are, and they're watching all along. So you have to keep that in mind, and you have to be that calm presence as much as possible for them so they get an understanding of, okay, this is how we handle big stressful situations, right? You have appropriate reactions, and in space you don't want your child to feel guilty as much as you're feeling guilty, right? So it's really hard to be regulated and be that calming presence for your child, because in your mind it's at least with my mind, I definitely was not, but I could see how my dysregulation and my stress was impacting her. So that always is a huge motivator for me to change anything about myself, is if I see it reflected in her and I see something I'm not proud of, then I'm like, oh, we got to work on that. So definitely being able to still connect with your child and be present and regulated is certainly important. And then that's when you can start to make good strategic decisions about what to do. So scientific backing, right? Based everything in science. There are studies that show parent dysregulation impacts child dysregulation. And that makes sense. I mean, when you take a step back and be like, did we really need a study to say that? But we do. So if your child is getting dysregulated, it's not as simple as, okay, I'll just be regulated and they'll be regulated, but there will be synergy. So that's something that we really focus on the platform as well, because this area is hugely missed, right? Like we focus on the child, focus on the child, focus on the child. But the thing is, we have to change as much as the child changes. So let's say you get the diagnosis and both of you plummet into despair and dysregulation and stuff like that. You can't have your child rebound and you not, right? Because things work in tandem. So as the child gets better, the parent has to as well. And many times it's the parent who is leading the child in regulation. So again, there are scientific studies that show this. It's an important aspect to autism that is generally missed by just about everything out there, because it is complex and it really takes diligence and foresight and a wide arching strategy. So parent regulation is something that is certainly important, and it impacts your child, and there's science that can back that up. Then the other thing is about just information overload, right? So you just got the diagnosis, and now if you started sharing it with people, people are sending you links, they're sending you people to follow on TikTok, and what about this? What about this? Did you hear about this doctor, right? And all this information is coming in. There have been studies that show if you flood parents with information, it just increases their anxiety and also decision fatigue, which as a parent, like I can say yes. I remember that well. I remember there's so much information out there, and you can only do so many things at one time, logically, that then you start to feel anxious because I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. I should be doing more. I should be doing more. I should be doing more. And, right. And now you're dysregulated again, right? So then your child feels it. And it just, all this information is not helpful. You need quality information, and you need to have a presence about you to be able to really decide what is the best next step for your child. So just keep that in mind. If you start to feel anxious, studies show that too much information is what can contribute to that. And then it's hard to make a decision, right? If you have 10 things to choose from, 20 things to choose from, what do you do? How do you make a good decision? It's really hard. So please just keep that in mind, and certainly be easy on yourself. But let me go back to comments again. Let's see. After 24 years of trying, I wouldn't say I have given up hope with my son, but I am way past the point of believing that something groundbreaking will ever happen to improve his autism. So that definitely feels very heavy, and in many ways, it might seem that you were hoping for that one thing that was going to change everything. And I might not be reading the comment correctly, but you're way past the point of believing that something groundbreaking will ever happen to improve his autism. What if it's not one groundbreaking thing, but a variety of important things that add up? So, well, let me talk a little bit more about that long term. But that's what happens when you're hoping for one that's like silver bullet, and you've also put all of the hope and all of the belief outside yourself. So let's let's keep touching upon that as we go on with the next section was going to be like 2 years in the diagnosis. So this is starting to maybe get into the vibe you're in. I understand you're 24 years after the diagnosis. So let's talk about 2 years in, right? So 2 years in, sometimes for some reason, parents feel like things should change within a couple of months. And I think that's because different TikTok and social media parents are out there and be like, oh my gosh, this changed overnight, right? Everything changed. I made one little diet change and everything's all done. It's in the minority of cases where one thing changes. So I'm thinking of I have a video on my YouTube channel that has a case study, so a scientific case study that went through how autism was reversed for one particular child. It's a case study, and it was because mold had colonized in their gut, right? So that was one thing, but it took 3 or 4 years before the diagnosis was like officially reversed. So even if it's one particular thing, it doesn't necessarily mean within a couple of weeks everything's going to be done. The whole idea is to appreciate the changes as you identify what the problems are and you shift into that solution. So just to let parents know, there's typically more than one issue when a child has autism with health, right? So I'm talking about with health. So just having the proper expectation of, okay, what are we looking at here? What are the possibilities? And again, this is why you want to use science. You want to use different lab testing to identify what the issues are and then focus you. So 2 years in, despair might sound like we've tried everything, nothing's working, I'm so tired of fighting. And that's like a vent. So I work with parents, and sometimes that's just where they are at the moment, right? Nothing's working. Oh my goodness, rah, 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 right? But that is just despair and the ego talking. So many times you just gotta let that come out, right? Blah. And then you can focus on, okay, is really nothing working? No, right? Okay, so like this worked, this got better. And having that understanding that progress isn't always linear, and sometimes it's not necessarily visible. And this is certainly difficult when, let's say, you identified a need, you're using a particular supplement or prescription, right? And it's one of those slow acting ones. So if parents don't have a good expectation of how something works, they might give up after 3 weeks when it might actually have taken 3 months for a visible change to see. Right? So sometimes we're focusing on the cellular level. Right? Everyone's familiar with leucovorin and the antibodies in the brain, right? Some kids, you give a small amount of leucovorin to, and they start talking. Usually they start talking, but usually there's still growth that has to be explored, right? So when someone starts talking, they can start to learn about relating differently. So it doesn't, someone starts talking, but there's a lot that still goes on in that. But with leucovorin, most kids, you have to optimize the dose. And most kids, it takes a few months to really see that optimal change. And you have to have the patience to go through that. And it's not even the patience, you have to have the expectation of how long should I expect for this to take, right? And hopefully you did all the lab work so that you take the guesswork out. You want to use science to take the guesswork out of where you put your hope. And that's how all of this gets related. So you might feel stuck after 2 years or something like that, but it's necessarily not, right? So you just have to reassess, okay, what's draining me? What are the problems? Maybe the problem is sleep, but what you're working on is speech, right? And you're giving leucovorin, and you started giving leucovorin in the afternoons and the evening, and sleep got worse, right? Because leucovorin can interrupt sleep, right? So it's about really just understanding all these different pieces. So identifying what's draining you, what's the problem, and then focusing on that using science to be like, all right, let's really look into this, dig into this, and then also being able to restore yourself. So celebrating the changes that have come along, because I'm sure there's some. It might be small and it might not be where you want to be. That's always the tension, oh goodness, in life, right? Like you might have come a certain distance, but you're not where you want to be yet. And so then you end up negating all the success that you had. And then it feels like despair. And it's just because you're not turning back and looking, wow, we've come so far. And that's definitely how despair can just build when you don't reflect back and be proud of yourself for the things that you have done, for the changes you and your child have made, and sticking with it long enough to see the changes. So burnout definitely can happen, but restoring yourself and being kind to yourself is many ways to balance that. So there's an appreciation of yourself and how good of a job you're doing in a difficult situation. That is what can start to bring you out of that despair and more into hope. And of course, using science, right, to focus you. You got to use science to focus. You want to use lab tests. You want to have numbers. You want to really have that focus. So again, you're putting your hope in the right place. So parental burnout, right, is definitely something that happens commonly. I definitely have been through it. And starting, I remember like talking to parents who were older, and they were like, oh, you have to do self-care. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I can't do a massage. This is ridiculous. Like, it's not where my head is. So really starting small with like a walk around the block, just getting a cup of tea, really starting small like that. Anything big that brings up resistance, you're not going to enjoy it, and it's not going to really feed you and help nourish you if you're thinking, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, I should be doing something else, right? So you start small, and you make a cup of tea, you sit down, and you drink the tea before it gets cold. Like, that's a huge win, right? And then you feel, okay, maybe that's like 7 minutes, maybe 3 minutes preparing it, 10 minutes. So 10 minutes as celebrating success and acknowledging all the hard work will certainly help with the burnout and help again ground you so that you can take action when you're in that grounded state, not when you're in that state of like, oh, I'm not doing a good job. Like, you're beating up on yourself. How are you going to come up with a good idea when you're just beating up on yourself? You can't. You can't. Trust me, I've tried. A lot of this is from experience, right? So it's important to take those pauses, to recognize that you are doing a good job, to recognize the changes that have been, and then kind of reorganizing, re-energizing, and getting good logical focus on what's next. Okay, let me look at comments again. Okay. Excellent. Yes, after my son's test came back, we supplemented his folinic, and I have been working on processing program and some other programs. All right, so you got your focus, and it's okay to get frustrated, and it's okay to have despair, right? So like, in no way am I ever saying that you shouldn't feel like this. Not at all. Right? That's the whole journey. You get so much stronger, you get clarity when you acknowledge that despair and you acknowledge what's driving it and tap into it. It helps focus you. So it's really not a negative thing as long as you don't wallow in it. If you wallow in despair, then that's what your life becomes. And you'll never shift out of it and create something different. You'll always just create the same despair every day, right? If you're just, I'm in despair, I'm in despair. If you take that pause and say, okay, I'm in despair, we've tried everything, nothing's working, what do I do? That's when you can start to reclaim your energy and create something different. So using the despair as focusing is really powerful. I won't say it's necessarily easy, so I don't want you to think like, oh, she's just saying it. There are many times where I wouldn't have caught myself in despair until it was like a week later. And I'm like, I've been in a really bad mood. Okay, why? And then I really start to think about what have I been thinking, and then that's when I get clarity. So it's a skill that hopefully you get better at the more you find yourself in despair. Okay, so awesome. Okay, so Riri, yes. You're what you're working, so you hit despair and then you got some clarity, and then what you're doing is starting to show some slow and steady results. So without going into the details, because I know you said you were doing some different things, you can talk to whomever you're working with to manage your expectations and to say, okay, so we're seeing some slow, steady results. All right, what can I expect in the next like month? Should things really change? Right. And so then that gets you more into, all right, so after a month of doing XYZ, we should see some impact on this. Right. And if you don't, then that's when you start to think about, okay, is the dose appropriate? Are they getting enough of it? Frequency, right? Is there anything that needs to be given in addition to, right? Certain supplements and prescriptions work better together with certain things. How can we build up that synergy? How can we support the body in other ways, right? So it's having those conversations with whomever you're working with that can really help manage the expectation, but then also help get you closer to results that you want. Because if that particular intervention is not working and you have, lab work that shows, okay, this is needed, then you can say, all right, that is not working for my child. We put in good efforts. I feel like we can honestly say this is not beneficial. So knowing what we know over here, not having to go chase new things, knowing what we know over here, what else could we try that would impact this, right? So it's not a lose situation at all whatsoever. Yes, and on the despair days, you take a break. Yep, and it's totally okay to take a break. Totally okay to take naps. I have learned naps are extremely beneficial for any night where the child does not sleep. It's virtually impossible. I'm super sensitive now. If I don't get like my solid sleep, and nowadays I'm the one who can't sleep. I find it funny. After all those years of my daughter not sleeping, now I can sleep. So you got to find humor in different things. And I very easily laugh at myself, even at 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm like, why can't I sleep? But I also know a lot of tricks. So I take out certain little supplements and do my little chemistry magic, and I'm back to sleep. So yes, taking a break, finding humor in anything is certainly important. Yes, this is just, oh my goodness. So I have learned more about myself from my daughter's diagnosis. Just about like who I am, what makes me happy. Like the reflection in her eyes when I see myself is just so powerful to me. Um, yeah, I definitely have learned a lot. And that's why this is autism, right? It was hard, and it's not something that I ever would have selected consciously, because who wants hard stuff? But I have no regrets whatsoever. And I tell my daughter that multiple times, that I want no one else. I want no other child. We've been through a lot, but we really do learn a lot if we're open to that, right? But that's where you get into the whole, it's okay to be in despair, but move out of it. And how do you move out of it? That's really the important part. Um, so yes, I totally agree. Um, Interesting learnings after autism diagnosis, for sure. And then let me just cover the last little bit, just the many years in. We covered it a little bit, and Riri, I'm glad you're putting all these comments in here, because the first comment was in despair, but then you started remembering, oh yeah, and you can start shifting out into hope, and then also strategy, right? Strategy is important. And again, if parents, grandparents, we have grandparents on the platform. If you're interested in working with us, I have a health coach that really helps with this mindset, setting goals, understanding the journey. Certainly click on that link and have a conversation with me, schedule that so we can explore to see if the platform is the right fit for you, because that's exactly what's needed. And that's why we developed that. It's how do you take all this scientific research? How do you make sure nothing is missed? How do you make sure to kind of put it in an order that makes sense, where synergy can be built, so that parents aren't always struggling? There's a parent on the platform whose child was a very picky eater. Oh my goodness. Very, very, very picky eater. And on the older side. So, not toddler, we're talking, middle school and stuff like that. And the mom definitely was in a lot of despair. So being able to focus on the science, and feeding therapy had failed multiple times, focus on the science, have that consistency to do what was needed. And then it's great how the child's eating different things, and she's just like, we didn't have to work hard at changing his diet once we started addressing certain things with health. And so that's what the platform teaches. It's that synergy. How do you focus on what's going to move the needle in more than just one category? So it's definitely important to approach it like this, because autism can be certainly exhausting, and there's too much of these maybes, especially now with TikTok and everybody saying, "Oh, this worked," right? And then it's easy and understandable to be like, "Oh, wait, what? Let me try that," and it just kind of gets you off course. So, all right, many years in. It might sound like despair, might sound like I thought things would be easier now. I thought we would be done. No one understands what I'm going through, right? So it is just, you've been at it for a long time, and having those days where there might be some grief, there might be some despair. Again, getting in touch with that, and then using the skills to focus you. A lot of times now, there's more information out now than there was, let's say, like 24 years ago. So I would definitely say being kind for yourself, right? Because anything related to leucovorin, it's been maybe like 10 years for leucovorin being, known. I wouldn't say popular, but social media made it popular. But so if you were in the autism space 20 years ago, you didn't have that information. So being kind to yourself about that, saying, listen, if I had known that, I would have done this, but we didn't. But like, be so proud of yourself that you're still at it 24 years in. And as the new information comes, then you can execute on new information. So there definitely is that balance of making space for the grief and the despair, but then also connecting with who you are and how, hey, I haven't given up. Hey, there's new information. All right, let's do this. And again, making sure you feed yourself nourishment and, body and soul and all that stuff. That's what helps for that longer journey. All right, let me look at some comments. Yes, awesome. So your son's picky eating stopped when we put him on the gluten-free, casein-free diet. Yep. And isn't that just the best use of your time? Because, right, gluten makes the body more permeable. So then the immune system has to work so much more. Casein, right, dairy, inflammatory. The scientific studies show that, pasteurized cow's milk is inflammatory, any way you look at it, right? You take out certain sources and then he's not picky eating, right? So it's just the benefits when you have focus are just amazing, and that's exactly what you want to see, different changes like that, where then you don't have to effort, right? You didn't have to do feeding therapy after that. You didn't have to, like, life got easier rather than harder. And you might have even been like pleasantly surprised, right? But like, wow, I changed this and then I got all this, because I'm sure some other things happened as well. On a cellular level, of course, right? Reducing inflammation and things like that. So yeah, definitely congrats on that. Hopefully you celebrated that and continue to celebrate that, right? So awesome for that. And I think we have time for one more comment, because I covered all of the despair. I guess the only thing would be, and this could happen at any time, what if nothing ever changes? So that's one aspect of despair that can kind of pop up regardless of where you at. And hope is a practice. Hope, you can see, if you're aware of the despair, you can embrace it, you can understand it, not make it wrong, understand it and help it focus you. And then that is the practice of growing your hope. And the hope grows because now you're more focused on what needs to be done. So it's a practice. It's an ebb and a flow. It's not like, hope isn't something that's permanent. I meditate a lot, and I wish that good meditation feeling was permanent. And it took me a really long time to understand meditation is a practice. And like, what does that really mean? It's a practice. Just like medicine is a practice, right? So we have to certainly understand that when we're interacting with doctors. They don't have the silver bullet. They don't have like the answer. The answer is really in you and your child. But hope is that muscle. It's a practice. So the more you acknowledge your despair and the more you move through it and have it focus you, then just the quicker you'll be able to do that. And then you'll be focusing more and more on what it is that is the most important. So definitely there's lots of studies on growth mindset, right? That's growth mindset, neuroplasticity. I work on my mindset all the time because I still hear thoughts of stuff that I don't want to be thinking. So it's a practice. It's definitely a practice. And okay, the last comment would be this. The despair definitely gets better. Yes. For me, for you, it has morphed into acceptance. Yes, that's not we didn't even talk about acceptance, right? Acceptance is, some parents resist the acceptance because it sounds like then you're saying it's okay that things don't change, and it's not. Maybe that would be a good another good live stream topic. Acceptance. What does acceptance mean truly when both you and your child want more? That's like a really fun, kind of delicious balance to do. So, and obviously throughout all of this, we started out in the beginning, our children feed off of our regulation energy. So we certainly don't want them to feel like there's something wrong, right? But we want to address certain health issues. So it definitely is a balance. Gotcha. Okay. All right. And last, I do have to end, but thank you, Rhythm Mix City. I like that. I don't have my glasses on. Hopefully I'm not butchering that. I came into the chat late and have so many questions, but I just want to say I appreciate everything you're saying right now. Yes, this is a hugely important aspect to the autism journey. Hugely. Like you know, if you've watched me, you know I'm extremely scientific. I am very logical, and it is super important to have that. But on the flip side, it's the mindset that helps with that consistency. How do I keep doing something when after a week I didn't see a change and I want to see a change and I want to, like, how do you keep on that? So if you like this conversation, if you like how we paired that together, then definitely I'll put it in the chat one more time. Consider clicking on the link and having a conversation with me as to if the platform would be appropriate, because this is what we do. We have the science, we have a way to progress to make sure nothing is missed, but then we also have a health coach that really helps with the mindset, because it's important. And we want this to be as much fun as possible. I know that might sound like, but you really can have fun with your child and with your life. And as the other person was saying, I think it was Kema, we learn so much from our kids. And I know me personally, autism is AWETISM. Took time to get there. That was not day one. Day one with the diagnosis, I cried in my car, right? So that is definitely a typical experience, but it doesn't have to stay there. So certainly consider working with us on the platform, and I'll end it there. And then keep voting on different topics. I really appreciate your input. And thank you for being here. It's great seeing you. All right, bye.